Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we have a fascinating topic. Celebration, Dungeons and Dragons. Guess what setting is now officially canon to Dungeons and Dragons? Middle-earth, bring it all in. Hobbits, Gandalf, Bilbo, everything, right? So how did this happen? So it happens through Dungeons and Dragons. It happens through D&D Beyond. And Free League Press had the rights to publish the Lord of the Rings tabletop role-playing game, but they were published it under some worthless, rule system that nobody liked or cared about. And then they were like, "Hey, let's bring this to Dungeons and Dragons." And so right now, you can go and you can finally get the fully canon, officially canon, officially legal, officially full done canon Middle-earth, right? So Bilbo, Frodo, the whole fellowship, right? Gimli, Legolas, you got, Boromir and Gandalf, and it's all there, and it's incredible. But what's really fascinating, right? And so, one, Lord of the Rings is now officially canon to Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, and that happened in November of 2024. But when was Lord of the Rings canon to Dungeons and Dragons? February 7th, 1974. Literally day one. Right? Now, what really gets interesting is today, Lord of the Rings is canon and accessible legally through Dungeons and Dragons. But Lord of the Rings was canon in Dungeons and Dragons literally on the first day, but it wasn't legal, right? So what's really fascinating, right? And we know it was canon to D&D, and the reason we know is Elon Musk's favorite book, right? Which is The Making of Dungeons and Dragons, 1970 to 1978. The book that every Dungeons and Dragons commentator that matters is talking about right now, right? So in that book, it showed that, that Lord of the Rings was canon to Dungeons and Dragons from day one. The problem is, spiritually, right? Those two products were one product on day one, right? Gary Gygax was like, Dungeons and Dragons is nothing but systematized Tolkien. We're just going, he created this incredible narrative that people could read, right? And Gary Gygax was like, that's great. We all loved reading the book, but we want a narrative we can live in. We want a narrative where our identities are inserted into Lord of the Rings. And he made that on day one. And he broke domestic and international law to do it, right? When they put Lord of the Rings into Dungeons and Dragons on day one, they were breaking the law, but they were doing right by canon, right? And so what I want you to understand is there has been a drumbeat of canon for Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons being combined from the first day. And that drumbeat was Gary Gygax going, I don't care if I have to break domestic law and international law to do this, right? It's what's right from a narrative perspective. It's what the world needs, right? And he did it. He literally broke domestic and and I'm not telling you this. They printed it in the making of original Dungeons and Dragons. They printed it. It's right there. You can see it now. This isn't a debatable subject anymore. It's sitting there right in the book. Okay. But how did that, drumbeat continue, right? Well, I think it was in 2023, Magic the Gathering Lord of the Rings came along and printed hundreds of cards, right? The One Ring and everybody I just talked about, right? And all of those cards were brought into Dungeons & Dragons canon then, right? But some people were like, oh, no, that's not Dungeons & Dragons canon, that's Universe Beyond, right? And you're like, wait a second, you printed Adventures in Forgotten Realms, right? Like, Magic the Gathering is canon to Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is... And so my point is, what's canon, right? Well, you can't tell by what's legal. You can't tell by what the product owners are saying, right? Lord of the Rings has always been canon every single day of Dungeons & Dragons. The only thing that has changed is, when Post Malone bought the One Ring for $2 million, that was a Dungeons & Dragons event. It had nothing to do with Magic the Gathering, right? It was a Dungeons & Dragons event because Lord of the Rings has been Dungeons & Dragons canon from day one. And this is what I'm telling you. This is why Elon Musk is talking to the president and talking about Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons does things on canon and intellectual properties that has never occurred on any intellectual property in the world. And also, pay attention. It's not just me saying that Dungeons & Dragons is not a game anymore. It is all over, right? Go take a look at Professor Dungeon Master. He just said Dungeons & Dragons is not a game. There are increasingly more and more people who are saying none of this is a game. None of this looks like a game. And to Elon Musk, it ain't a game. That dude's thinking about dropping $12 billion to buy Dungeons & Dragons. And I called that 3 years ago. I said that the actual value of Dungeons & Dragons is $10 billion. People laughed. Ain't nobody laughing now, right? Like, this is extremely exciting. Congratulations. Lord of the Rings it's always been canon. Now there's just a smile on the Tolkien estates. That's the only difference, right? So really fascinating. Thank you to Free League for bringing it over, and enjoy your second breakfast. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic, please consider like subscribing and have a fetch millennium.